Hey everyone, time for another breadcrumbs video. We are looking at the life of Hezekiah. So we're in Isaiah 38 and 39 and 2 Kings chapter 20 and 2 Chronicles chapter 32. And here we come into, Hezekiah's been an amazing king, a really good king, but he falls ill and he is told he's going to die and to get his house in order. And he cries out to the Lord for healing. The Lord heals him and is ultimately going to give him 15 more years of life. But a couple of interesting things are going to happen during that stretch of Hezekiah's life. Some we read about in today's reading, and some others we're going to read about here shortly as we go through the scriptures. But I was drawn to a couple of scriptures in 2 Chronicles chapter 32. I just want to focus on two verses. So beginning in verse 24, about that time, Hezekiah became deathly ill. He prayed to the Lord who healed him and gave him a miraculous sign. Hezekiah did not respond appropriately to the kindness God showed him, and he became proud. So the Lord's anger came against him and against Judah and Jerusalem. Hezekiah then repented of his pride, and the people of Jerusalem humbled themselves, so the Lord's anger did not come against them during Hezekiah's lifetime. So it's just interesting that God heals Hezekiah, and Hezekiah gets puffed up in pride in response. And as we carry on down through verses 27 through 31, we're going to see that Hezekiah was a man of great wealth. He had a lot of treasures. And so what was the root of his pride? And he basically says in verse 31, when ambassadors arrived from Babylon to ask about the remarkable events that had taken place in the land, God withdrew from Hezekiah in order to test him and see what was really in his heart. Very interesting that here we have an envoy from Babylon that comes, and as we read in the other portions today, we know what happens. Hezekiah begins to take them around and show them all the treasuries of the temple, and to basically boast and display all of the blessings that God had poured out on Israel. And ultimately, this is going to result in negative consequences for Israel. We know that Babylon, ultimately, God's going to use them, not in Isaiah's time, but really in Jeremiah's time, to take the people of Israel into captivity. But here's an interesting scenario where God spares a man's life, gives him 15 extra years. Hezekiah's heart changes a little bit during this time. And one of these changes is in regard to pride. And he kind of gets puffed up and he begins to boast and show off a little bit to this envoy in Babylon, who I'm sure took that report back with them to the emissaries took the report back to the king of Babylon and reported back on all the wealth that Israel had. But also it's interesting that in this 15-year stretch, we're going to find out that Hezekiah fathers arguably the most evil, wicked king in Israel's history. His name is Manasseh, and we're going to end up reading about him as we go forward. So although Hezekiah has been an amazing king and overall is a very good king in Israel's history, there's a couple of spots here that the Lord is dealing with. And it's interesting that it says that the Lord withdrew from Hezekiah to test him, to see what was in his heart. And so as we go through life, I feel like that's the application for us. You know, the Lord says that even in Deuteronomy, when he was testing the children of Israel, Deuteronomy chapter 7 and 8, you can read about it, where the Lord says he tested the children of Israel in the wilderness to see what was in their heart. And so sometimes the adverse circumstances that come in, the Lord will see what's in our heart through painful circumstances. But here's the opposite side of that. The Lord's really blessed Hezekiah. He's healed him, given him wealth, given him high esteem, fame, and honor. And sometimes the test of prosperity can be even more difficult than the test of adversity. Who do we boast in? And obviously the Apostle Paul says, I only boast in the Lord, not in anything of myself. And so humility is a trait that is very godly. Obviously, Jesus embodies that, calls to us to take his yoke upon our shoulders, for it's the easy yoke and the light burden, and he's humble and gentle of heart. And so as we get positioned into influence, fame and wealth and power can go to our head a little bit. Any human being that can happen to. And here it's happening to Hezekiah, and the Lord is moving in this to reveal what's in Hezekiah's heart, but also it's going to be setting things in motion here for future events. And it's interesting and a little bit sorrowful, maybe a lot sorrowful, that Hezekiah's response here today in terms of what's going to happen, the judgment that's going to come from Babylon, is that he was just happy that it wasn't going to happen to him. And he had no compassion on his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, those that would come after him that would really face some very difficult circumstances. It was like Hezekiah's heart was just happy that he didn't have to go through that. So anyway, those were a couple thoughts as I was reading through the scriptures on today's reading. So God bless you, and have a great rest of your week.